right, good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for our May 2nd grant funding workshop. My name is Jeff Schmidt. I am a program manager here at Arizona State Parks and Trails. Also have a few other members of our grant staff in the room with me today. Guys, you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Matt Eberhardt, the State Off-Highway Vehicle Coordinator for Arizona State Parks and Trails. So I'll be helping out with the off-highway vehicle stuff, and we're all kind of monitoring chat and questions and stuff as they come in. So feel free to unmute yourselves, raise your hands, type it in the chat. We don't want to just talk to each other for the next couple hours. So please chime in. Don't be shy. I'm here to help. Thank you for joining us.
Yep, I'm Alec Wilcox. I'm a grant coordinator here. I handle a lot of the agreement process and the claims.
I'm Juan Colorado Alvarez. I'm the new member of the team right here. I'm also the planner 3 for this team. So yeah, happy to be here.
And also our chief of grants and trails, who's responsible for our entire section and all of our programs, is Mickey Rogers. Unfortunately, Mickey is in the field today, so he will not be joining us, but we will do our best to answer any questions you have in his absence.
To make him proud.
We'll try. So this first slide shows just kind of an overview of what we'll discuss today. We'll start by providing a really high-level overview of the entire application review approval process. From there, we'll dive into some of our specific funding opportunities, including the Rec Trails program, our Heritage Fund, the State Off-Highway Vehicle Program, Land and Water Conservation Fund, and our State Lake Improvement Fund. Depending on our pace, we may take a break about halfway. We'll then transition to talk about some of our important policies, some of the common issues we see with some of the applications, some tips on how to basically submit and administer a successful grant application. And we should have some time at the end for any project-specific questions. But like Matt mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We are monitoring the chat, and we'll break every once in a while and respond to those questions. Or feel free to just take yourself off of mute and ask away. So this slide shows current federal funding opportunities. I won't get too in-depth here because we will discuss all of these opportunities individually later. But I did just want to point out that you'll see all of these grants operate on a reimbursement basis, meaning that basically you'll make an expense, you'll make a purchase, and then you will submit a claim to State Parks, and we will reimburse your account. We've had a little bit of confusion on that recently, so we just want to be very clear about that right at the beginning, that all of these grants operate on a reimbursement basis. This slide shows the remainder of our funding opportunities, and these are all actually state funding. So the review approval process, a little bit more streamlined, but again, just want to point out, these all operate on a reimbursement basis. You'll see they all have different maximum, minimum request amounts, match amounts, and timeframes to complete the work. But again, we will discuss that as we go along. You can see there are a couple of programs here highlighted in red, including a lot of our Heritage Fund programs, our local, regional, and state parks funding, our state historic preservation funding, as well as our American Rescue Plan Act funds and our HVAC funds. Those are highlighted in red. We have expended all of those funds for this fiscal year. So we don't currently have any funds available in those programs, but we do anticipate additional funding to be appropriated once the budget is approved. We expect to hear more about that beginning of July or end of June. So we'll go ahead and start to talk about our basically application submission, review, and approval process. Something else we've had a little bit of confusion on recently, so we want to try and be as clear as possible. So the first step in the process, regardless if you've received funding from us before or not, the first step in the process is to reach out to grant staff to discuss your project, what you have planned. Any motorized projects, Matt is probably your best point of contact. He handles all of our motorized applications. Anything non-motorized, that would be me. Probably be the best contact for that, Jeff Schmidt. And then really, if you're not sure who to contact, feel free to reach out to Matt, myself, or to Mickey, who, like I mentioned before, oversees all of our programs.
One thing too, in talking about contacting us, what we've been seeing a lot of lately is people establishing themselves in the Web Grants online management software that maybe they might be trying to add themselves or be added to an active project, or they might be pursuing a new opportunity. So if you're a first-time applicant or someone that's just trying to be added to an existing project, let us know before you go into Web Grants, because I think we do those maybe once a month. We'll add people in or accept those. They're not really an application, but accept those profiles. Yeah, accept those registrations. So if we know that you're going to be trying to link to a grant or wanting to apply, that's kind of a double opportunity for us to talk about your project and to make sure that you're accepted into the Web Grant system and applying for the right funding opportunity. We've seen way too many times people go in, start clicking buttons, think they have the right program. It's the wrong one. You got to start completely over in a different funding opportunity. So talk to us. We will help you. We will make your job easier in applying and finding the right sources and making sure you're into the system quickly.
Yeah, and that in turn will make our lives and jobs easier as well and ensure that your application is reviewed in a timely manner. So again, first step is to reach out to grant staff to discuss what you have in mind. After that, we'll basically tell you if what you're proposing is eligible. We will then direct you to the appropriate funding opportunity in our online grant system, Web Grants, which we will discuss a little bit later. All of our applications are completed, submitted, reviewed in this in our system, Web Grants. So we'll provide a link to that later on in the presentation. So once you've had a discussion with us, we've guided you to Web Grants. We've told you the correct funding opportunity. You'll basically begin your application. You'll work your way through the application, submit it. Once the application is submitted, we will receive a notification on our end that it has been, and then we will go in and review the materials. We try to do this within 2 to 4 weeks. Kind of depends on how many applications we currently have to review. It may be shorter, it may take a little bit longer, but we will review your application and we will reach out to you if we need any additional materials, if we notice any, major omissions, or if there's anything else. We'll basically provide a little bit of guidance on how to maybe improve your application, as well as any materials that we still need. Once we determine that the application's in good shape, everything is clear and concise, we have all the required documentation, we will move your application along to our advisory committee and state parks board. Now this is kind of a two-phased review and approval process. The first phase is our advisory committees and state parks board. Any of our non-motorized applications are reviewed by the Arizona State Committee on Trails, ASCOT, AORC, which is the Arizona Outdoor Recreation Coordinating Commission, and then the State Parks Board. All of our motorized applications follow a fairly similar path. It's just they start with a different advisory committee. They go to our off-highway vehicle advisory group, and then to AORC, and then to the State Parks Board. Just want to make it clear, staff does not approve or deny these grant applications. We basically determine eligibility, and we provide recommendations to advisory committees and State Parks Board.
People still hopping on? Welcome, welcome.
It is up to our State Parks Board. They are ultimately responsible for either approving or denying these funding requests. So we get a lot of fingers pointed at us and a lot of blame sometimes for an application not being approved, but that is not us. Again, we basically compile all the materials and see the application through the review process. It is our State Parks Board who is ultimately responsible for approving.
And I think even with that too, in recent years, I would say the most reasons or the most frequent reason for denial is just we ran out of funding. Like, I don't know that it's the board saying, no, this isn't a good project. It's mostly been a lack of funding for some of these different opportunities, right? Like,
yeah, I'm trying to think, man.
I can't think of any, honestly, that have been denied for.
Yeah, any that have been denied just due to the merits of the application. It's primarily been due to lack of funding. All right, so submit your application. It is reviewed by the advisory committees and State Parks Board. Once the State Parks Board approves, we enter the next phase of the review process. This is where it kind of splits off. Any of our state-funded projects will be sent along to the State Historic Preservation Office for review of Section 106. Any of our federally funded projects will either be sent to the Arizona Department of Transportation Environmental Planning Group or the National Park Service, depending on the program. Any proposed projects that involve ground disturbance will go to SHPO. Their review process is currently about 30 days. Once SHPO has reviewed and approved, they don't have any concerns with any archaeological, cultural, historical resources being affected by the undertaking. We will reach out with a project agreement, a draft project agreement, which we ask you to review and provide, any comments. We ask you to provide the name of who's actually going to sign the agreement, and then you will return that to us. We'll basically turn that right around. We will send you a final agreement, which you will have your leadership sign, and then that will be returned to us again. After that occurs, we will have our leadership sign. We will then provide a fully executed project agreement and an approval to proceed. I want to be very clear about this because we've had more issues about this recently. Your project being recommended by the State Parks Board does not mean it has been approved. You still need to wait until either SHPO, ADOT EPG, or National Park Service have reviewed and approved your applications. We've had a couple of applicants after our board meeting go out and start actually expending funds. We've had to go back and tell them that they were not eligible yet to begin basically, spending grant money. The project had not been approved yet by SHPO or ADOT. So until you have a fully executed project agreement and an approval to proceed in hand, make sure you're not expending any funds towards the project. And we will hit on that several more times throughout the presentation. In terms of federal review, National Park Service, ADOT EPG, those processes are taking a little bit longer than SHPO reviews. Those are taking between 6 and 9 months currently. So definitely a much longer review process, but we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that later on. So you'll receive your project agreement and your approval to proceed. So from there, you can begin basically expending funds, submitting reimbursement requests. You will also be required to submit status reports. Another thing we'll hit on a few times today. There is a difference between status reports and reimbursement claims. Status reports basically provide internal staff with an update as to where you are in the process of, implementing your project. All of our programs, most of our programs have different reporting periods based on the funding. Majority of them require quarterly reports. Some of them do require monthly or bi-monthly reports, but we'll discuss those when we get into our specific funding opportunities. Just want to clarify that there is a difference between our reimbursement claims and our status reports. Depending on the program, you will have between 6 months and 3 years to complete the actual on-the-ground work, at which time you'll be required to submit a final report, a final status report. You'll submit your final reimbursement claim, and then we will run through some project closeout procedures with you. And really, that's all there is to it. Any questions on the process as a whole? All right. We don't have any application submission deadlines. You can apply for these funds at any time. We keep these open on a rolling basis, although we do have somewhat loose deadlines if you would like your application reviewed at a certain time. And these next deadlines are coming up pretty soon. Next State Parks Board meeting scheduled for June 15th. So some of our non-motorized and our motorized projects will have to be reviewed prior to that. So it's likely you're not going to be able to submit in this time frame. But again, we will be accepting applications after these dates. They'll just go through the advisory committee and state parks review process at a later date.
And I apologize, I did not catch this. It's actually May 9th for the motorized folks, because OFHAG will meet at the end of May. So that'll give us enough time to create those materials.
So it's likely you're not going to get a motorized application in for this next round of reviews, but the State Parks Board meets almost every month, and we schedule our advisory committees somewhat in conjunction with that. So if you don't make the May 9th deadline, there'll be another one in the next couple of months. So that's something we certainly will discuss with you once you reach out to have a conversation with us.
And again, don't let Jeff's comments discourage you. Some of the supplemental applications can be submitted in a quicker timeline. It's the more competitive projects or ground disturbing activities that will take up more time to actually build the application. So if there's questions or concerns on the motorized side of things between now and the 9th, let me know. Obviously, don't call me on the 9th expecting to get it in, but if we started today, through the end of the week, we could probably work on getting something in if there was an immediate need. So,
and Matt is definitely right. Some of these applications are a little bit less intensive, so it is possible they could be submitted by the 9th. We would just prefer that you not rush through the application process just to reach this advisory committee review deadline. We found that the applications usually aren't the most complete or well done when they're rushed like that. So again, you can apply for these grants at any time, so there really isn't any need to rush. So are there any questions on the process or kind of the timelines? If none, we'll go ahead and dive into our specific funding opportunities. Not seeing any in the chat. All right, so we will carry on. First, we'll talk about some of our non-motorized trail funding opportunities. As you'll see, we have two separate opportunities here, one federal, one state, that basically support very similar activities, if not the same activities. So eligibility for these programs, federal, state, county, local, tribal governments are all eligible to apply. Nonprofits are also eligible. Got to make a correction on this slide. Federal agencies are not eligible to apply for our heritage funding, which is our state trail funding. They are eligible to apply for the recreational trails program, which is our federal side, but not our state side. So I just want to clarify that. This table here shows the maximum request. As you'll see, much larger maximum request for the federal rec trails program. Also have our match requirements. Again, a much smaller match is required of the federal funding. But as you'll see, the time frame to complete these projects, regardless state or federal funding, is between 2.5 and 3 years. So all types of non-motorized uses are eligible. Hiking, equestrian use, mountain biking, even paddle trails. And not just the trails themselves, but any trailhead facilities, any staging areas, any amenities within the trailhead staging area. Just some examples here: ramadas, restrooms, parking areas. We were actually just at the International Trail Summit in Reno a couple weeks ago, where all administrators, recreational trails administrators, met to discuss the program, and a lot of them were unaware that this funding, at least our recreational trails funding, can also be used to install electric vehicle chargers in trailhead staging areas. So certainly want to make folks aware of that. We expect to see that become a little more popular moving forward. The funding can also be used to purchase land and easements to develop trails. Again, any facilities, any features along the trail, benches, shade structures, any ramp gates. I think this bottom left is a kiosk, informational kiosk. Can also be used to get rid of unauthorized trails, unofficial trails. So that's something that we haven't seen much of recently, but funding can be used for. Any questions on either of our non-motorized programs, either the Rec Trails program or our Heritage Trails Fund? If you have any questions about those, or if you'd like to discuss a specific project, you can reach out to me directly, and we will have our contact information again at the end of the slideshow. We will go ahead and move on to our trail maintenance program. So the trail maintenance program addresses routine maintenance on existing trails. Eligible activities include tread maintenance, clearing of pathways, repairing drainage, replacing existing fencing, and is limited to minor reroutes of existing non-motorized trails. That's the key here for this program. Existing non-motorized trails. Again, very similar eligibility: federal, state, county, local, tribal governments. Nonprofits are also eligible to apply. This one works a little bit differently. It still works on what I would call a reimbursement basis. But with this program, State Parks, actually, we have 6 state contracted trail crews who, if you apply for this funding, you will be required to utilize one of those 6 crews. And then we actually pay the crews directly for the work. So if you're new to the grant process, if you're new to our process, it's a good way to kind of get a feel for how our programs work and how to administer a grant, because we take a lot of the kind of financial administrative side out of things with this program.
We have a question from Chris with restrictions to the trail location. Is that in reference to the trail maintenance program? Both, okay. I don't know that there's any restrictions related to the land ownership, as long as it's open to public recreation. So if it, you know, and you had the appropriate approvals from the land manager. So we've seen a lot of instances where private landowners will allow a trail to cross through their property. So as long as you have the appropriate documentation saying yes, that whoever the land manager is has approved the work or the project, you should be fine.
Yeah, that's
A huge part of it.
yeah, I think that's right, Matt. That would have been my response as well. And yeah, we will do that research. We will see whose land, you know, the trail crosses, or the proposed trail crosses, and we will need we have some templates for them. We will need the land managing agency's approval to basically do the work on the land, and then they will basically become responsible for maintaining those improvements for X amount of years, depending on the program. Question about a grant application, Lee. We do have blank applications on our website, which you can download at any point. But then the rest of our applications are all electronic. They are found in WebGrants, which is our online grant administration system. If you're not already registered for that, you will be required to register. But please, before you start an application, feel free to reach out to us so we can discuss kind of what you're proposing. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll get back to our trail maintenance. Right now, the maximum request for this program is $50,000. Again, same as the recreational trails program, requires a 5.7% match. If you are a federal agency applying for these funds, 5% of that match has to come from a non-federal source. Time frame to complete these projects is a little bit shorter. It's only 1 year. And again, as I mentioned, work is completed by a contracted trail crew. You are still required to provide match, but most of these trail crews will provide more than enough match on your behalf. And this program does require quarterly status reports, which we'll discuss in a little more depth a little bit later. We actually just went through the trail crew solicitation process. I'm not sure, I'm not in the procurement world, so I'm not sure if all of that is finalized yet. I expect it to be shortly. So during our next workshop, we'll have a slide that has information on all of those crews. But if you're interested in this program, just reach out to me and we can send along contact information for all of those crews. If you're applying for this funding, I would recommend reaching out to all of them, seeing if they will come out and give you a good idea of cost for what you're thinking. Some examples of eligible trail maintenance activities. These are a little extreme. But really, any maintenance of existing non-motorized trails would be eligible. We also do allow minor reroutes. Minor is a very relative term. That's something we will deal with on a case-by-case basis. But we know that a lot of the older trails were built in, not the most sustainable fashion. So if it's to improve the sustainability of the trail, to ensure that we don't have to go out there and maintain it, every year, we do allow minor reroutes. Any questions on our trail maintenance funding? All right, we will continue on. Our next programs are outdoor safety and environmental education programs. Similar to our trails funding, we have both federal and state funding that basically accomplish the same type of activities. Again, eligibility for our federal side, federal, state, county, local, tribal, as well as nonprofits. On the state side, same eligibility minus our federal agencies. Again, you'll see the match, 5.7% for our federal funding, 10% for our state funding. The time frame to complete is pretty drastically different here. For the federal side, we only have 1 calendar year to complete these grants. Most of them don't involve much ground disturbance, so the review process is pretty streamlined. It's still only 1 calendar year to complete these funds or to complete these projects. On the state side, these projects are good for 2.5 to 3 years, so a much longer time to accomplish the project. So what can those funds be used for? Few examples. State parks, actually, we applied for this program a couple of years ago, and we were awarded funding to basically do sign language interpretation of our Kartchner Caverns cave tours. Thought that was a really cool use of this funding. The city of Phoenix has received funding to help with basically marketing one of their hiker education programs. Tread Lightly, we've worked more with them recently. Basically, leave no trace, environmental stewardship ethics. This bottom right one is some signage, little map, and kind of an emergency marker along a trail at Skyline Regional Park in Buckeye. Any trail-related conferences or outdoor environmental education-related conferences, we can support those. One of the big pushes recently has been getting kids outdoors. So we will provide funding for transportation, for education while kids are out in the field, for passes, for state parks, regional parks. We've seen a little bit more interest in that recently. We've also provided funding to a local search and rescue group. We've funded a lot of positions, a lot of coordinator positions, one of them at state parks. Again, kind of leave no trace, environmental stewardship. We've done some trail construction training, really just a wide variety of eligible uses for this funding. Haven't had too much interest, at least in the federal side of things to this point. But again, I think it's one of our more diverse programs and would love to see a few more applications and a little bit more interest in this program. Any questions on our safety and environmental or outdoor education programs?
Give Jeff a break.
Oh, didn't even realize. Okay. We'll turn it over to Matt real quick.
Yeah, I apologize in advance. This wind has been kicking my butt, so I am very congested and sniffly. So bear with me, but as Alex scoots away. So off-highway vehicle program, well, really all of our programs have come a long way in just the few short years that our team has kind of been together. So when I came to Parks, 2016, I think, 2015, 2016, you had to submit 10 hard copies of your application, had to mail them to our central office, and a CD-ROM of your project photos. So we now have web grants, and we've continued to evolve and to build our programs out to be, you know, like we've talked about already, on a rolling basis. Again, used to be twice a year. So just trying to come up with ideas and ways to make our programs function and get the funding to the end users faster. So with that, long story short, with our off-highway vehicle program, we have our competitive cycle or our competitive grants, and then we have 4 supplemental programs for a total of 5 different funding opportunities within the OHV realm. And our off-highway vehicle program is primarily driven by the OHV decal for residents and non-residents, and then 0.5% of all gas tax goes to the off-highway vehicle recreation fund. Say that 5 times fast. And then we also do have motorized specific RTP funding that's available, and that's typically $570,000 a year. But in recent years, it's been a little bit more than that. So big picture, we have quite a bit of money for the off-highway vehicle programs. And in looking at our competitive options, you can apply for up to $750,000. I will say in some instances, we have seen some projects that have been larger scale that have been required to request additional funding above and beyond that. But those are typically split funded between RTP and OHV so that, you know, the whole pot of money that's coming out of one or the other program isn't, you know, above that 750. These projects require no match, which is very different from any of our other programs as well. Obviously, it's recommended, and it's very easy to obtain if you're doing work with volunteers. That current volunteer rate is $29.95. So the ability to add match to your grant at a significant level is relatively easy to do. These projects require quarterly status reports, and you'll see in our supplemental programs there's a little bit different reporting process for those. And these do have to go through our boards and commissions. These are open, though, to nonprofits all the way up to federal agencies, and it's anything you can think of. I think we have some pictures. Anything you can think of. That's top left, we have the Arizona Game and Fish Department. We just did a huge upgrade to their off-highway vehicle range. So they offer courses to the public for you to do hands-on off-highway vehicle training. The middle one there is me when I was actually at Game and Fish. One of my first projects with them was to develop a youth-based education program, which we call the Quail Kids, and that's still in operation now. And they're actually working towards doing a partnership with the trauma centers throughout Arizona to educate youths on safe ATV and off-highway vehicle operation. Trail damage, trail heads, training, education, support facilities, anything you can think of related to off-highway vehicle recreation, trail building, trail maintenance. Planning and design is a big one. We've seen a lot of planning and design for trailheads, for large adventure loop type trails like the Arizona Peace Trail. So planning and design is an eligible expense, which is also different from a lot of the other programs where that's not eligible. Your planning and design would have to be done prior to applying. So,
This is one of the few programs, this Land and Water Conservation Fund, that do allow planning.
so you name it with off-highway vehicle, we can help you work through it. Getting into our supplemental programs, again, just designed to help supplement the larger competitive options that exist. We have one specifically for law enforcement. As many of you know, unfortunately, with recent events in recent years, there's been a huge influx in all types of recreation, off-highway vehicles included. So we now have a law enforcement specific project option for any law enforcement agency throughout the state, up to $100,000. So we've actually upped the amount eligible and the match requirement. So it used to be $30,000 for the requirement or the amount, and the match used to be 5%, but we've upped that to 10% after conversations with our board. So 10% match up to $100,000 for anything related to off-highway vehicle law enforcement. Now this has to be, again, specific to enforcing off-highway vehicle laws. This is not for search and rescue. This is not for buying a unit to go do trespassing or drug patrol. It is enforcing off-highway vehicle laws in areas that are impacted within your communities. These projects require every other month reporting and do have to go to our board. These are a 2-year grant. And again, anything related to off-highway vehicle law enforcement you can think of. Equipment purchases, overtime, staffing. Here's a couple examples, some units that have been purchased. The two on the right are pictures from Polaris. They actually have a partnership, a law enforcement branch out of the factory. So those units can come from the factory outfitted with all of the law enforcement equipment. They have the same for military too, which is kind of neat. But so yeah, units, overtime, radios, personal safety equipment, any of those types of things for law enforcement are eligible. Next one up, we have small grants. This is kind of designed to mirror the trail maintenance program. So this is looking at pre-existing trails for maintenance, maintaining, adding connections, adding connector routes, those types of things, up to $100,000. And these do require a 5% match and need to be completed within 1 year. So these should be shovel ready. You should have all of your planning done. They will still need to go to SHPO for review. And these do require board approval as well as every other month reporting as well. I think we've only seen 1 or 2 of these applications submitted, but this is a great way, especially now that we have our trail crews, to get work done and get it done quickly. Because again, with this, similar to the trails maintenance program, we can pay those contracted trail crews directly. And like Jeff mentioned, there are 6 of them this time. We had 4 before, or no, was it 3? 3 before. So we've doubled our number of trail crews to be able to go out and help get our projects completed. So again, board approval, bi-monthly reporting. And a couple examples here. We did a Box Canyon cleanup project. I think that's the only one. And then trail maintenance is kind of the main design behind these. But we did do a great project with Wickenburg Conservation Council for the Box Canyon area. And they've seen a huge reduction in trash in Box Canyon. So their messaging, their presence are significantly helping in that area. Next up, we have our emergency mitigation projects. Again, with the influx in users, there's also been an influx in bad behavior, unfortunately. So these projects are eligible for vandalism, damage to cultural or environmental or wildlife habitat or water catchments or things like that, cultural sites, vandalism, weather or fire damage, so natural disaster, or if trails have just become unsafe for the recreating public. And this, again, is for motorized only. We've gotten the question before, is it for non and motorized? So this is motorized only. No match is required, but these do have to be completed within 6 months. And these can be for up to $100,000. What's different with these and the next program I'll talk about is our staff has been given the authorization by our state parks board to approve these at our staff level. So they don't have to go through the boards and commissions, but obviously you'll have to have all of the appropriate documentation in place for SHPO. And again, designed to be on pre-existing trailheads or pre-existing trails and completed within 6 months. So we've seen a lot of these in recent months for vandalism, for fencing projects to protect cultural sites, fencing projects to protect environmental sites. Those types of things are the primary design here.
We're also seeing more of these applications to basically prevent motorized access in areas that are designated for non-motorized use.
Correct.
That a lot recently.
Yep.
And then just to add to what Matt said, these do still have to be reviewed by SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, to ensure that no environmental, cultural, archaeological resources are going to be affected.
So a few examples here. You can see vandalism there, graffiti on some rocks, riding hazards. Those are some cattle guards there in the middle that have been damaged, just overuse. Habitat damage on the right, a meadow that negatively impacted by off-highway vehicle use. Bottom left there, Tank Pass was a trail segment that was an uphill climb that was like incredibly difficult with rains that had just caused so much runoff and rock debris that it was just impassable. Chevelon Canyon was a cultural site that was being negatively impacted, so we did a pipe rail fencing project there. And then same with Adamsville was another emergency mitigation grant for a cultural site that was being negatively impacted by OHV, so we did fencing there as well. So kind of a mix of options. The last one, again, I don't know, maybe we just need to get rid of it. We have not had a single application for this one. $10,000. We can pay a contractor directly to make the signs. And this can be for kiosks, signs, decals, stickers, anything you can think of related to signage or signage related activities to educate the public on where they are and how to get there. Up to $10,000, 5% match, need to be completed within 1 year, again, on pre-existing trailheads or trail systems. And again, would just need to be approved by the SHPO. So if you're replacing existing signs, those types of things, kiosks, information panels, fiberglass markers, the carcinite signs that get pounded in, all of the little stickers that go on those. And the board has approved us to award these at the staff level as well. So they don't have to go through boards and commissions. And these do require monthly reporting. And that would be the same for the environmental, the emergency mitigation, I apologize, are also monthly. I don't think I mentioned that. So, yeah, so haven't seen any applications for this. With our off-highway vehicle program, another note, you can have a competitive grant and a supplemental grant at the same time. However, if you have elements of a supplemental in your competitive, you wouldn't be eligible. But if you didn't have signage in your competitive grant, you could certainly do this to help supplement the work of a larger project. Again, just examples here, stickers, large kiosks, trail signage, carcinite signs, directional signs, all those types of things would be eligible. Signage applications. Yes, the signage applications are for motorized trails only.
Yeah, Aaron, our safety and environmental education, both the Heritage Fund and the Rec Trails program, as well as the Recreational Trails program, the non-motorized competitive grant, signage is an eligible expense for all of those programs. So multiple different programs will support signage for non-motorized trails.
So that's a quick overview of the motorized stuff. Are there any other questions or concerns? I'll be here throughout the workshop, so if any come to you, don't be shy, unmute yourselves. We'd love to hear from you.
Appreciate it, Matt.
Yeah.
All right, a couple more opportunities to run through here. I know we do have a lot of funding, so you know there's a lot to throw at you at one time. But again, we're always available. So if you have any questions, you need any clarification, we're more than happy to assist you and direct you to the appropriate funding opportunity should you have any questions. But we'll transition to some of our programs that support the development of, I guess I would call them more traditional outdoor recreation facilities, parks primarily. And we actually have two specific programs that support this type of development. Again, one on the federal side, which is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and then one on the state side, which is the Local, Regional, and State Parks Program, LRSP. Same as the previous federal programs, federal, state, county, local, tribal governments are all eligible to apply. School districts are actually eligible to apply for these funds as well. Federal agencies, unfortunately, are not eligible for our state, local, regional, and state park funding. They have plenty of other sources of funding, so we will keep that to local and state agencies. Again, both work on a reimbursement basis, meaning you'll expend funds, you'll submit a claim to us, and we will reimburse your account. Both of these programs require dollar for dollar match. So on the Land and Water Conservation Fund, Land and Water Conservation Fund was established to assist federal, state, and local governments in the acquisition and development of outdoor recreation facilities. Currently, we may have some internal discussions about this, but we're currently accepting applications of up to $1 million. That has to be matched with $1 million, so potentially $2 million projects. $1 million in grant funds, $1 million in matching funds from the sponsor agency. And this match can be in the form of cash, volunteer or staff labor, materials, or there are actually a couple of other grants that will match LWCF. One of them is our local, regional, and state park funding. So the time frame to complete these is 3 years from the date of the National Park Service sending out award notification. This program has probably more stipulations than any of our other programs. First of which is you're required to basically identify a project area boundary. So when you apply for this fund, you will basically provide us the boundary of the project as well, which will likely be the entirety of the park. And then once the project is complete, that boundary must remain open to the public for outdoor recreation in perpetuity. That's a pretty big ask, we understand. So definitely requires some little bit of forward thinking internally. But we do come out there every 5 years to inspect these projects to ensure that they are open to the public. You are also required to display an acknowledgement sign, basically saying, and this is for all of our programs. I don't know why we don't discuss this with all of our funding, but it's probably more important for LWCF because it is part of our inspection requirements to locate this sign. But you are required to post an acknowledgement sign, and we have those signs in office. We will send them out to you once your project is complete.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that for mine.
Yeah, we'll just we ask that you post them somewhere that's somewhat visible. This can be used on land that is leased from a federal government agency, but in order to be eligible, that lease has to have 25 years or more remaining on it. We know this is an issue for a lot of agencies. It's pretty common to get a 25-year lease from some of these federal agencies. It's pretty rare to get longer. So if you're interested in this funding and the land is leased from a federal agency, just let us know and we can kind of walk through that process and what we need from you to be eligible. This is new. It's causing us a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of questions still, but any manufactured iron or steel needs to adhere to the Buy America, Build America. Basically needs to be American certified steel or iron. We're still waiting on guidance from National Park Service about how these requirements will be implemented, who's actually responsible for certifying. We're still working through that. But again, if you're interested in this funding, that's a discussion we will have with you. And the priorities for this funding, our scoring is based on our trails plan as well as our statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. We'll go a little bit. Dawn Collins, who is part of our Office of Continuous Improvement, usually steps in here and talks about the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. Unfortunately, Dawn's at another meeting right now. So again, I'm going to try and step in and speak to SCORP really quickly. So again, it is our statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. This is required for Arizona to be eligible to receive land and water conservation funds from the National Park Service. So again, it's basically just a plan where we seek input from Arizona residents, from the various land managers across the state, both federal and state, federal, state, and local, as well as stakeholders. We collect this information through surveys, through facilitated meetings, through focus groups. We get public comments. We also go throughout the state and present to various groups. So what is the purpose of SCORP? Again, it's required to be eligible for land and water conservation funds. It's also a useful planning tool for Arizona recreation providers. Basically, make sure that all Arizonans have a voice in how federal grant funds for acquisition, development, management of outdoor recreation facilities in Arizona, basically how that money is administered. We recently completed our, and I'm gonna forget the years, if it was 22 to 26 SCORP. I don't recall the exact period, but we recently completed it. It is with the National Park Service now for final approval. So now we're kind of transitioning to implementation. We create these fancy plans with all these great ideas and, you know, plans to basically change the world. We've realized that we haven't done a great job of actually following up and making sure these plans that we've identified are implemented. So that's kind of where we are now in the phase. We want to talk to you. We want to hear what your thoughts about the actual plan itself are, and kind of how you're using it internally, and what we can do to make sure that the priorities identified within the SCORP are implemented.
I believe it's a 5-year plan as well, right? Same with
It
Trails
is,
plan? Okay,
yeah.
so it'd be 23 to 27.
Yeah,
No, 28? No. Math is hard.
we'll pull up the actual
I'm looking at the SCORP website.
document, but
Yeah.
yeah, they are required every 5 years, and they are done every 5 years. So if you're interested in helping us with implementation of SCORP, I have Dawn's email address at the bottom of this slide. We can also drop it in the chat. But if anybody's interested in participating, providing feedback on what the plan contains or implementation procedures, Dawn would love to, certainly love to talk to you.
And we're getting ready, I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but we're getting ready to dive into that for our 2025 to 2030, that's crazy to say, Trails plan, which guides our off-highway vehicle and our non-motorized scoring criteria. And just another quick side note, we are working towards establishing scoring criteria for the supplemental grants. We currently only have scoring for the competitive grants, so there will be a scoring mechanism for all of the off-highway vehicle stuff, I would say, by the end of this fiscal year. So
if you're interested in participating in either of those planning activities, please feel free to reach out to Dawn. She would love to hear from you. So we discussed land and water conservation funds, so we'll go ahead and talk about our local, regional, and state park funding. Very same eligibility requirements in terms of eligible activities, what the funding can be used for. A little bit different. This funding is in much higher demand. The review process is much quicker than the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So we've seen a lot more interest in this program. We should have more information about how much funding is available come the end of June, the beginning of July. We currently have expended all of our LRSP funds, but as of last year, we were accepting applications up to $250,000. This also, just like Land and Water Conservation Fund, requires a dollar-for-dollar match or a one-to-one match. And same as Land and Water Conservation Fund, can be either in kind, can be cash, the equipment or materials can also be used as match. A little bit shorter of a time frame for the most part, between 2.5 and 3 years to complete the actual on-the-ground work, depending on when the agreement is signed. And it does not have that same perpetuity requirement as Land and Water Conservation Fund, but we do ask that the area remain open to public outdoor recreation for at least 25 years. This is an example of a project boundary map, project area boundary map that we will need if you're submitting for LWCF funds. And this is the area that we will come and inspect on a 5-year basis to ensure it remains open. We do have some resources internally to assist with some of this mapping. So if you have questions, if you're a smaller municipality who doesn't have staff, doesn't have any mapping GIS staff, just let us know. We can certainly assist you with this. So some examples of eligible activities under both of these programs. Really anything you can think of in your standard city, local, county park. Ramadas, picnic facilities, picnic benches, grills, trash receptacles. Top right is a inclusive playground that was recently finished up in Show Low. Any infrastructure would be eligible. This is an aging water tank, actually at one of our state parks. Bottom right, another inclusive playground. This one was done, I think that's the city of Chandler, the newly open North Homestead Park. Any type of courts, basketball, just multi-purpose, tennis. We're getting slammed with pickleball court requests. Any aquatic facilities, just traditional old-fashioned playgrounds. Any restroom shower facilities. I believe the bottom right photo is from one of the Maricopa County regional parks. The funding can be used to acquire land for the development of outdoor recreation facilities. I believe the bottom left is a new park being developed, Sundance Park out Buckeye. I forget what bottom right is. I believe it's the newly developed Peralta Regional Park out in Pinal County. If you haven't been out there already, definitely go out there and check it out.
Like we got a question from Hezekiah.
Yeah. Will funding amounts determined by the budget have an impact on top-end grant amounts? Hezekiah, you maybe want to clarify that. Are you asking if, what the final approved budget, if that'll affect the maximum grant request amount? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, Jeff, that's exactly it. So, the $1 million for LWCF, if the funding process is coming lower, or same thing with the 250,000 for the state version?
Yeah, absolutely. Once we figure out what is included in that budget, we will adjust the maximum request amounts. We're hopeful to have a little more funding this year, so we're hoping we can increase those. But it was a requirement that we only, 20% of appropriated funds per project. So we had 250,000 total for all of our, for non-motorized trail Heritage Fund projects. So that's where we got our 50,000 max request, and that worked for all of the programs in the same way. Does that answer your question, Hezekiah? Awesome.
So essentially, if we get a larger pool of money, the 20% of that goes up.
Exactly.
Or the 15 or whatever it ends up being. Okay.
So we're hopeful more funding will be appropriated, because I think we've shown the need for it, how quickly we've gotten it out the door. But certainly we'd appreciate it if you reached out to your elected officials and let them know that this funding is extremely important for the state, especially for some of the smaller, more rural communities. We won't spend too much time on this, as the applications are required to be submitted by the end of May. And this is one of our more detailed applications, but we do expect this funding to come back next year. So we did at least want to get it on folks' radars. This is the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, ORLP, or Legacy Grant. This is very similar to Land and Water Conservation Fund, except it works on a national level. Most of our LWCF funds are stateside. So basically the applications are submitted to us. We run it through our open project selection process, which is our scoring that's determined from the SCORP. And we basically determine which applications, us and the State Parks Board, which applications we forward to the National Park Service. This ORLP program works a little different. We basically accept applications on behalf of the state, and then we forward them to National Park Service, who is actually responsible for reviewing, scoring, and determining if a project receives funding or not. A lot of funding in this program. Max request for each application is $10 million. So we're talking some big projects. It does require the dollar for dollar match, which kind of limits who can apply and how much they can actually request, because you need that match in place before you apply. Time frame, just like LWCF, 3 years from the National Park Service award date. And this program specifically designed to serve underserved communities, at least in terms of park and recreation resources. It's also only eligible to urbanized areas or municipalities, counties that have populations of 30,000 residents or more. So it's a pretty limited pool of applicants who are even eligible to apply. But again, these applications are due to National Park Service on the 31st of May for this next cycle. They haven't announced future cycles, but if you're interested, if you think you can get this application done in the next couple of weeks, let us know. We're certainly open to discussing with you. And this is the list, at least from a couple of months ago, which cities and towns would be eligible based on that 30,000 resident requirement. And then on the far right side, we also have which counties would be eligible. We have a question in the chat. Can counties use their entire population? Hezekiah, we kind of take this on a case-by-case basis, but if Pinal County wanted to submit an application, we would certainly be open to discussing that. we would probably need a little more information on what area of the county would specifically be served by the project. We're getting there. We're almost through all of these. So the next program is the State Lake Improvement Fund, we refer to as SLIF. Eligible projects must directly relate to bodies of water that allow motorized boat use. That's one of the huge caveats here. Projects can include development of new boat launches, support facilities, marking buoys, watercraft, trailers for safety and law enforcement, watercraft, radios, lights, and first aid equipment. Eligibility: Game and Fish Departments, county, local, and tribal agencies. Just like the rest of our programs, it works on a reimbursement basis. The maximum request currently is $800,000, but again, once we find out how much funding was appropriated in the budget, that may go up or go down. This program does not require any match, but any match you provide will improve your scoring. Again, 3 years to complete, please. And if you have any questions on SLIF or SLIF eligibility, you can email Mickey or myself. Just a few examples. We've seen a lot of requests to purchase new law enforcement watercraft or search and rescue watercraft, marking buoys, any ropes to basically mark off swimming areas. This bottom right photo is a wind warning system that Maricopa County applied for. Docks, boat launches, really anything having to do with motorized or lakes that allow motorized boat use would likely be eligible. We won't spend much time on this, as I am certainly no expert, and we have expended all of our funding for this fiscal year. But again, we do anticipate to have additional funding in this next year. So we'll at least get it on everybody's radars. That is our state historic preservation grant. Basically, eligible projects must directly involve resources listed on the Arizona or National Register of Historic Places, or they must be determined eligible for listing by the State Historic Preservation Office. Eligibility: state, county, local, and tribal governments, schools, and nonprofits are also eligible to apply. Again, another reimbursement grant. At least last year, the maximum request for this program was $150,000. You'll see the match is a little higher. The majority of our programs requires a 40% match. 3 years to complete the actual on-the-ground work. And if you do have questions on this program, we actually, State Historic Preservation Office administers this grant, and they just hired a new grant coordinator yesterday. Her name is Jessica Lapota, and her email is right here. If you'd like to reach out to her with questions about this program, you can, but you can also reach out to Mickey or myself as well, as Jessica kind of gets up to speed a little bit. I won't go through all of these, but this list is eligible. So there are a number of planning activities that are eligible, as well as actual brick and mortar type projects. So I'll just leave this up for a second. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to Mickey or myself or Jessica. And we will hit on this in a little more detail in future workshops once we have a better idea of how much funding we will have. All right, we made it through the longest portion, through all of our different funding opportunities. So we're gonna go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break. My clock shows 11:19. So we will go ahead and, yeah, we'll get started again at 11:25. Next portion should be a little bit quicker. We're just gonna talk about some of the different policies. We'll talk about some tips and basically how to submit and administer a successful grant application. So yeah, we will be back in about 5 minutes. Feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat while we're gone. All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started again. Should be pretty quick from here. So we'll go through some important policies and requirements of the programs. Just wanted to bring this up. We created a table to show kind of what costs were eligible for our different programs. Won't go through this line for line, but we did mention earlier that both our competitive motorized program and Land and Water Conservation Fund are both eligible for planning. The only program that allows any pre-award costs is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. None of our programs allow food or beverage to be reimbursed, so keep that in mind because that has been an issue in the past. So control and tenure. Sponsors must have adequate control of project sites to construct, operate, and maintain the areas for the term required by the grant program and project agreement. That information will be included in your project agreement, how long that area needs to be maintained for. If you are a nonprofit, or if you are doing work on somebody else's lands, we mentioned this previously, but you will be required to provide a land manager approval letter, which basically states that the land manager is aware of and supportive of the proposed activities, and they're basically going to take control of those improvements and be responsible for maintaining those improvements for X amount of years, dependent on the program.
Hezekiah cut me off. I almost had them all in there.
Hezekiah, you want to take yourself off of mute and go ahead and ask about the BLM lease?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So if you're applying for LWCF funds, for example, and you're already in your 25-year lease agreement with BLM, how does that work? And I know you guys were having discussions on that topic to see if there's any wiggle room.
Yeah, we are continuing to have those discussions, Hezekiah, with National Park Service, just knowing how much of an issue it is and how difficult it is for some of these federal land managing agencies, how time consuming it is to get, a new or an updated lease. I think we are flexible. So say if it's within if there's still 23 years remaining on the lease, we're certainly open to having that discussion, but NPS has had us go back and actually work with the sponsor and the federal agency to basically, redo the lease or extend the lease or just basically start the lease over to have 25 years when we're actually submitting the application to National Park Service. So it's been a real pain. It doesn't make much sense to us considering these lands, they have to remain open to outdoor recreation in perpetuity. So the lease requirements are just, it doesn't make sense to us. It's something we're pushing National Park Service on, but something that we handle on a case-by-case basis. Not a great answer. My apologies, but just kind of is what it is right now.
All right, I'll go ahead and dive in here a little bit, and then we'll let, Alec take over. You got one of these, or two of
Yeah, I
these?
got a couple.
Expenditures. Every 6 months, you're required to submit some type of financial reporting in the form of a claim. So claims are different from status reports. Claims you can submit, I mean, I'll leave it to Alec, but as frequent as whatever works best for your organization. We've seen every 2 weeks. I think we've seen some that are weekly, some that are monthly, but at a very minimum, at least every 6 months, where your project will be considered inactive and have the potential to have funds withdrawn. Now, pop quiz. If the State Parks Board approves your project, how soon can you start incurring expenses? Does anybody know? Is it immediately? Is it within 1 month? Is it once you've received the signed project agreement and approval to proceed?
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. So don't incur expenses until you've received an approval to proceed and a project agreement that is signed by both organizations.
We hate to keep hitting on this.
We have to
but
say it.
it just happened a couple of weeks ago. So we want to ensure that this does not happen to anybody else.
Yes. Just because the board says yes, they still need to be reviewed. Alec will still be in touch with you regarding a draft agreement. Once you have the full agreement and your approval to proceed, and it'll have a date in bold on it, as of this date, you can incur expenses. Anything that you go and buy prior to that may not be eligible. So,
We started doing a better job of tracking this inactivity. So, moving forward, we will reach out to you when you are approaching that 6-month period, just to give you a heads up to, hey, you need to make a purchase or your funding could potentially be withdrawn. Make plans though to purchase something small once you actually have your project agreement and approval to proceed. So you can make sure that, as soon as that agreement's in hand, make a purchase, your project will be active for the next 6 months. Just make some plans when you're planning your project to make some small purchases throughout.
and then the next up is progress reports or status reports. These are due on a quarterly basis, on the last day of the quarter.
A majority of the program.
A majority. So some of the ones are monthly or every other month. It depends, but you'll receive that information as part of your agreement, and I believe in the approval to proceed letter as well. So all of those details will be in your agreement and your approval to proceed. And Alec, do you want to talk a little bit about how those affect each other with withholding funds, and if you have this, you don't have that type of thing?
What do you mean if you have this?
If they don't have status reports, we can withhold funds for.
Yes, so the first thing I look for when I see a claim submitted is I go in and just make sure that you're up to date on your status reports. So if you're late on a status report, I'm not even going to look at the claim until you're up to date on those.
So, yeah, I mean, just a great reason to make sure your status reports are up to date.
Yep. And then, Jeff, if you want to take those last two, acquisition and terms of public use. I think, well, with terms of public use, it's basically most of these projects need to be open to the public within, for 25 years, and the acquisition of any property needs to be open to recreation for at least 99 years.
Yeah, most of the acquisition projects will occur using land and water conservation funds. If you are acquiring property, that process, the negotiations to purchase that property have to be started within 6 months of receiving the fully executed project agreement. And yeah, term of public use for land and water conservation fund, it's perpetuity. For some of our other programs, basically 99 years. We ask that this remains open to the public. You can come back to us to maintain this property or this trail or whatever the case may be. But that will be included in the agreement that it is open to outdoor recreation for X amount of years, again, depending on the funding opportunity. Procurement standards. If you are a federal government entity, you will follow your procurement standards, the federal procurement standards. For anybody else, including state agencies, municipalities, nonprofits, you will be required to follow the state procurement process. I'm trying to see if there's anything. That's about the gist of this slide.
Oh yeah, so the biggest thing with procurement standards is making sure that if you're an entity, you can follow your own procurement standards. So if you're a city, town, federal agency, you can follow your procurement standards. If you're a nonprofit primarily, you need to adhere to the state's procurement policy, which in most cases is just making sure that you get 3 quotes, and request a like for like, quote or request for solicitation or work. And that's where the nice thing with the trails crews is you don't have to go solicit. You can just pick one, get a quote, and go. Assuming you have your approval to proceed and your signed contract or project agreement. But that's the biggest thing, is making sure that you have all of your audit paperwork for 5 years and that you've adhered to those standards of 3 quotes in most cases for the different products and things like that.
And we don't ask you for this documentation, but we do ask that you keep it on hand for at least 5 years in case we are audited. But this isn't something that you need to provide with your application. Commercial general liability insurance is required for our city, county, state agencies, federal agencies. This is not an issue. They're all insured. They have adequate coverage. But for our nonprofits, you are required to maintain this level of coverage, and it is an eligible expense in the grant. So you can basically request funding to purchase this insurance. As we've mentioned, everything is done. All of our applications are submitted in Web Grants, which is just an online grant administration system. The website is right here on the bottom of this slide, and we can certainly drop it in the chat as well. You are required to register. Registration is free. But if you're new to the system, you are required to register before you can access any of the applications, any of the system. We actually are responsible for configuring and maintaining this system. So if there are any technical issues, we are the point of contact for that. So it's pretty nice just being able to, kind of address things immediately. We don't have to wait for some help desk halfway across the world. We can handle all this stuff internally. So once you are registered, this is kind of what it'll look like in the system when you're navigating to the appropriate funding opportunity, which we will discuss with you during our initial conversations about your project. Again, everything is done within this system, including correspondence. It's basically just an internal email system. There's usually several of us that work on these applications, so it's a good spot where we can keep all correspondence in one central location so everybody can see kind of what the back and forth has been. Some common issues that we run into in our applications. We see a lot of issues with our budgets. The top little table where it says parking lot, that's an example of a line item we've received in a budget before. We need a little bit more detail than that. The bottom table shows kind of the amount of detail we're requesting when you're filling out your budget. But if you're having issues, if you have questions on the budget while you're actually completing the application, reach out to us and we will gladly walk you through it and kind of the level of detail that we need.
All right. So this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. With our RTP grants, we have this thing where you can bank your match. So if you want to submit all of your match up front, what we suggest you do is only enter the amount to meet the minimum 5.7%. And then on future claims, just submit a spreadsheet showing that you're tracking and deducting from the total so that you're meeting the 5.7% for each claim. Because again, these claims will not be approved unless they have the minimum 5.7% in every claim. Our other programs are a little more forgiving. For Heritage Fund and OHV, you can submit all your match up front and you're good to go. As long as you meet the minimum percentage out the gate, you'll be good to go for all your future claims. Land and Water is pretty straightforward. You just must meet the 1-to-1 match with every claim.
We got a question in the chat, Alec. Calculating match differs by funding opportunity. Some require a percentage of the whole project and some are a percentage of cost. Can you specify?
All right, so the RTP is where you're going to use that funny formula. You'll divide it by 0.943, multiply it by 0.057 when you're calculating your in-kind match. This is because the match is based off of the total project cost, which is your request and your match combined. So that percentage is off that total number, not just off the reimbursement request. But the Heritage Fund and OHV, it's just based off of the request. Does that answer your question? And again, with RTP, that was in-kind match. So if you're submitting cash match with an RTP grant and it's $100, then you just need 5.7% of $100. You'll decrease the amount you're requesting by $5.70, and that'll be your match.
Another common issue besides the confusion between reimbursement claims and status reports. This is a reimbursement claim on the screen right now. The report period is a common issue.
That's tiny for folks on our, that are looking at it, but.
Yeah, so basically there are two different periods for your project. There's the period of performance, which begins when you get your approval to proceed. It'll have the date of the last signature on your agreement, and it goes until the end of your project. The report period is the period that you're reporting on the work. So when you submit a claim and you have invoices for certain dates, you just want to make sure the report period includes the dates that the work was done on those invoices. We often see people will submit the report period and they'll put, the end of the month as the final date. Please don't submit the end date of the report period as beyond the date that you're submitting the claim. It's just, I usually go in and fix it, but it would still be nice if we could just clean that up. Yep.
Once your grant is approved, you have your fully executed agreement and approval to proceed. We will do additional training sessions with you where Alec goes into a little bit more detail about submitting reimbursement claims. We discuss the banking match a little bit more. We talk about our status reports in a little bit more detail as well. So if you do apply and you are approved, we will reach out once your project is fully approved to invite you to future training sessions where you learn a little bit more about, once the grant is approved, how do you actually administer it? Mm-hmm. So we do those on pretty much a quarterly basis. So keep your eyes out for presentations.
And previous versions of this workshop and our what we call our post-award workshop are on our website. I'm going to drop another link. And this workshop and the presentation will be on that same website right there, azstateparks.com/workshops.
Another common issue we've run into is issues with status reports. We've hit on this pretty good now, but we want to keep going just to try and clarify as much as possible. We were recently audited several months ago. One of the audit findings was that these status reports were not being submitted. The ones that were being submitted were not being reviewed and approved in a timely manner. So we thought that was probably for a couple of reasons. I think people were getting confused with how often the reports were due, the period that they were basically reporting on, and the due dates of these reports. So to try and take any, miscommunication, any ambiguity out of the situation, we went in and once your project is approved, we will go in and schedule out your status reports. We'll basically put in the report period, the date that report is due, and then you should receive email notifications from the system when the report due date is approaching. So we will go in once your project is approved and populate all these reports for you, and we will organize future workshops once approved to discuss what this actual status report submission entails. But status reports very different from reimbursement claims. Probably one of the biggest issues we run into are issues with the NEPA section of the application and the cultural clearance review form. I won't go too much into this. If you have questions while working through the application, this is kind of one of my primary focuses. But in terms of NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, if your agency does have a biologist on staff, get them involved as early as possible. The required documentation to adhere to NEPA really varies based on the funding source, the location of the project, and the actual project activities being proposed. In general, most of our funding opportunities, projects just based on the activities, are categorically excluded from a full-blown NEPA review. Obviously, if you're a federal agency doing work on federal land, those requirements are definitely different. NEPA is a requirement, but in general, most of these projects are categorically excluded from NEPA. There are some cases, specifically with LWCF, where we need to do some additional consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. That's usually pretty straightforward and not extremely intensive, but kind of a case-by-case basis is how we deal with those. But if you have any questions on your specific project, we are here to walk you through that. Another big issue is the cultural clearance review form, which primarily deals with archaeological, cultural, historical resources. The purpose of that form is to determine the effect, if any, a proposed project will have on any of those types of resources. Again, I know not a lot of agencies have archaeologists on staff, but if you do, get them involved as early as possible. If you don't, reach out to us. We can at least do a little bit of background research, let you know if an area has been surveyed, if it has been surveyed, if there are any resources in that area that may delay approval of your project, and we can kind of work through things that way. If you're applying for LWCF funds, you can actually include the, cultural archaeological survey in your budget. And those costs can be reimbursed. So if you're applying for that program, I'd highly recommend you go ahead and have that property surveyed if we are able to determine that it's not been previously. It'll really streamline the review and approval process, and honestly, it's the right thing to do. Just a few tips before we let you go. We mentioned it before, but our applications are available for download, just blank applications on our grant pages on the State Parks website.
Incoming.
Yeah, Matt's going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat for those. We definitely recommend you download this, review the application, have an idea of what we're asking for, and start kind of compiling those materials before you even begin the actual application in WebGrants. It'll just make the process that much smoother.
Yeah, so with that, each funding opportunity has their own page currently, and there's a blank application for each of the types of opportunities within that larger funding pool. So
in general, they're pretty similar, all of the applications. Some of them have some different criteria to respond to, but in general, kind of the same information is being requested of all applications for all opportunities.
And they might look slightly different than what you see in WebGrants, because I believe all of the PDF versions of our blank applications were created when we were utilizing eCivis.
Yeah.
So they might look a little different, but the content and the information we're requesting in those applications is the same as it is in WebGrants. And then as changes happen, we'll make sure that you're aware of those.
And we are working to update some of the application forms, because we realize some of them, we ask for some information that's really not as pertinent these days. So we will be working to streamline those applications over the next couple of months. So there may be a few differences, but in general, they're pretty much the same. So just a few more tips before we let you go. Certainly have a plan. We don't mind speaking with you about, what our funding can be used for, what would be eligible, but it certainly helps us if you have something already in mind. We'll go anywhere in the state to discuss our funding, to discuss specific projects. We're more than happy to come out and meet with you. But we do ask you have some sort of plan. It really makes the process a lot smoother. If you have any questions, or if you're thinking about applying for any of these opportunities, reach out to us. We're more than happy to walk you through the process, to answer any questions you have. It can be kind of a time-consuming process, so certainly recommend beginning as soon as possible. Again, ask questions. Some of these applications request some pretty detailed information. So if you're not sure what's being asked, let us know. We can clarify that for you and really help you in obtaining that information. Attend workshops. You guys are all off to a good start here. We hold these on pretty much a monthly basis. The information does change slightly from presentation to presentation. There's obviously a lot of information. We forget things. We remember things at subsequent presentations. So they're not all the same. So please feel free to come to future workshops. We'll also have a little more information on our heritage funds and how much funding is available. So certainly check out some of our future workshops.
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
this is Mary with the City of Somerton. I do have a question about a current project that's underway status. If I can have just a few moments of your time for clarification on that, either now or after your formal presentation, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, Mary, if you don't mind hanging out for a couple minutes, we'll run through these tips real quick. And I think we have one more slide about our next workshop, and then we will we'll hang out and discuss as long as you'd like.
Thank you so much.
So provide the required documentation in a timely manner. A lot of the times this pertains to the cultural clearance review form or NEPA. A lot of the time these requests are not coming directly from us. They are coming from our reviewing parties, either ADOT, National Park Service, or SHPO. So please don't shoot the messenger, and just try and send us along what we're requesting as quickly as possible, because the longer the delay in your project being approved, the longer until you can begin the actual on the ground work. So please try and get back to us as quickly as possible. Be consistent. You say you're going to do 5 miles of work on Trail A, make sure to keep that consistent throughout your application. Minor inconsistencies like that, they throw off us, they throw off the other reviewing parties, and it's a quick way to get your application returned to you. So adhere to the next tip, keep it simple, but also keep it consistent. We don't need to know too much background information on how this project came to being unless we're asking specifically for that information. So really kind of keep it direct and to the point, keep it as simple as possible, because we do review a lot of these applications, and really the simpler the better. But it's a difficult balance, because we still need you to let us know, the where, how, who, when, and what of the project. So detailed, but not overly detailed. And we can certainly help you work through that when you're submitting your application. I just penciled this in this morning. Tentatively, our next workshop is scheduled for June 1st, same time, between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. We will be sending out that invite shortly. We also do update our website. That information will be added to our grant pages. So certainly go make sure and check on those occasionally.
And that one, Jeff, on the 1st will be a full workshop like this, or is that a post-award?
That's going to be a full-blown talk about what funding we have available and the actual application review and approval process. So just like today. And then shortly after that, once we get a few more applications approved, we will do one of our post-approval workshops. Thinking probably end of June, early July. Yep. It's kind of what we're thinking. But I believe that is all we have. Thank you everybody for joining us. Our contact information is here. We will hang out for the next 10, 15 minutes, however long we need to. So if anybody's got any specific questions, type them in the chat, take yourself off mute and ask away. But thank you again, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.
Hi, gentlemen. Let me know whenever you're ready.
All right, we'll give folks a couple minutes to
Thank you.
hop off here and let it get down to a few folks.